Let's go.
Oh yeah, you need to start. Wait a minute. Hold on. I already started recording this.
Okay.
Where's my? There it is. Are you ready to start your recording?
Yes.
All right, give me a sec here. I forgot about this part of it. Okay. Uh, uh, bully. Okay, it's recording, or it's monitoring. Okay. 3, 2, 1, click.
Click. All right, clicked. We're actually recording now.
Hey Willow.
Yeah?
I know we ask this question every so often, but is this the gayest story we've ever covered?
You know, it might be. It kind of flip-flops for me, because there are moments where I'm like, this is gay, and there are moments where I'm like, maybe not.
So yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a revelation to say that The Willows by Algernon Blackwood might be about two gay men. That certainly has been, put out there many times.
Yeah.
Algernon Blackwood's sexuality has been speculated on many times.
His name is Algernon Blackwood, so he can't be straight.
Look, the importance of being earnest has a main character named Algernon who is very straight. And it was written by
His name is Algernon Blackwood.
That's true.
Those two, if it was just one or the other, maybe. Together,
And I guess you can't claim that any character in an Oscar Wilde play is very straight. But I guess that's on me. But I did read a pretty cool essay written by someone about this. Not about this being a gay narrative, but doing a gay read on this story, and how it just sort of slots really nicely into like post-Victorian like feelings about being a gay man in like
the first thing I said to my mom while I was reading this story was, "Oh, I think this might be gay." And she's like, why do you think that? And I was like, well, it's like the late 1800s, early 1900s, like male companionship that you get in stories,
Yeah. But it goes beyond that. But first of all, why are we even talking about a thing that's not a Guillermo del Toro movie? What's going on? Where are we?
Well,
what's wrong?
If our listeners for some reason haven't been listening for the past, I don't know, year and a half.
Well, hey, somebody who's a big Algernon Blackwood fan may have stumbled across our ramblings.
We're reading it because we're reading The Dark Descent by our good boy David G. Hartwell because we had trouble watching movies. And we're almost done with this book.
We're so close. We're so close to the end of A Fabulous Formless Darkness. I can taste it. Yeah. Not that I've been unhappy reading these stories.
No.
I'm very happy to read these stories. It's just cool to finally be able to finish something.
Yeah.
So yes, we're in the third part of Fabulous Formless Darkness, which sort of slots into, it's kind of the halfway point between psychological horror and there's definitely something going on. We just don't really understand what it is. And The Willows by Algernon Blackwood is kind of a lot of people consider it like the quintessential weird horror story because
it's good.
It comes right out and is like, there's just things we cannot fathom that aren't malevolent. But if you draw attention to yourself, they'll squash you like a bug. Sorry, everybody.
Exactly.
And it also,
that's just how it is.
Yeah, and it deals with like the multiple dimensions theory. Old gods who aren't really gods. They're not gods, just beings.
Why did my page get whatever?
I don't know why your page did whatever. I'm not there. I can't see you. I can see you. I can clearly see you.
I wrote more comments in my pages because I felt the need to.
But before we delve into The Willows, Willow.
It had to be said at some point.
Yeah, we said it in the last episode, but it's always funny. What can you tell me about Dreamy Boy Algernon Blackwood?
He wrote many of his best works set outdoors.
He did write a lot of good outdoor fiction.
It's an interesting observation to make from David G. Hartwell, because according to David G. Hartwell, I don't do any research before.
No, I know you don't. It's always a setup.
According to David G. Hartwell, like horror before like this guy like was writing was normally set indoors. So I guess that's sort of an Algernon Blackwood twist on the traditional.
Yes. And he had a good reason to like set stuff in the out of doors. So he was born in southeast London in Shooters Hill, Kent, March 14th, 1869. His father was an evangelical minister and his mother was a widow. I mean, she had been a widow. She had been widowed.
Okay.
She was the widow of the 6th Duke of Manchester.
Oh yeah, I remember you saying this last episode.
Yeah, he was a quiet kid. He found solace in nature and bopped around from school to school, eventually became interested in Eastern mysticism and theosophy as a teenager. In order to escape the confines of Europe, he moved to Canada, where he tried to be a farmer, he tried to be a journalist, he tried to be a bunch of things, sort of failed everywhere. And but his experiences in Canada led to his more famous outdoor stories, which are set in and around the Canadian wilderness. His first collection of stories published in 1906. His first novel was published in 1908. Throughout his life, he produced over 200 stories, a dozen novels. He was in broadcasting. He was known on BBC Radio as the Ghost Man.
That's awesome.
He had a successful career in broadcasting. He was a celebrity on Saturday Night Story. He was appointed to a commander of the Order of British Empire in 1949, and he died on December 10th, 1951. His ashes were scattered in Switzerland. He wrote a lot of short stories about ghosts and the supernatural. He was definitely interested in the occult. That's one of the big things. He was not just a writer of the occult. He participated in the Ghost Club. He was a member of the Ghost Club.
That's sick as hell. I don't know what that means. That sounds awesome.
The Ghost Club is a paranormal investigation and research organization that was founded in London in 1862.
Oh, like the people from The Changeling.
Like the people from The Changeling. This is like the first major legit, like, we are paranormal researchers and investigators. It boasted such notable members as Charles Dickens, Charles Babbage, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Robert Aikman, W.B. Yeats, Peter Cushing.
The boys that we've read, or at least heard about.
Yeah, Morris Gross, who investigated the Enfield poltergeist, Lynn Picknett, Jeff Holder, Colin Wilson, and they investigated very famous ghost stories: the haunting of Borley Church, the ancient Ram Inn, the haunting of Ham House, which is just great, the Clerkenwell House of Detention, all these famous haunted places that they investigated. And Algernon Blackwood was right there in the midst. We don't really know much about his personal life. He kept himself to himself, but he had a lot of friends. He had a lot of contemporaries. He wrote a play once called The Starlight Express, which is not about trains on roller skates. But he was well respected and
didn't like Lovecraft. I remember that.
He did not. He was not impressed with Lovecraft's writing, although Lovecraft was impressed with his writing. And he's often compared to M.R. James and Sheridan Le Fanu, but a little bit more. He's considered a little more artistic. He's considered had a little more deft with the word.
When did this story come out?
This story. So, The Willows, not Willow. That's you.
I am an eldritch horror that will drag you into the depths of the river, though.
The Willows was first published in 1907 I believe in The Listener and Other Stories.
I have another question before we continue. There's a story that H.P. Lovecraft wrote.
Okay.
And
that's
the
true.
Climax of the story is two men are in a boat going away from something, and they are holding their fingers up in the shape of a cross. When did that story come out?
Well, it would have been long after this, because Lovecraft wasn't publishing stories like that in 1907. So
yeah, because there's a segment of this story that it has to be what Lovecraft was referencing.
Oh, do you remember the stories?
No, I can't remember what it's called.
I'm trying to find out, but I'm not going to spend all my time looking for it. But
it was one of the short stories. It ended with, or it didn't end, but it had a scene where, in order to escape, the main character was holding up, was in a boat. It was rainy, whatever, and he was holding up his fingers in the form of a cross. Cool.
Yeah, it could have been influenced by this.
Because it directly, in this story, they see a man in a large boat shouting, and he is holding up the sign of the cross.
Yep. That could be. It could very well be that Lovecraft remembered this, because there's a lot of really weird, evocative imagery in this story. Would you agree?
Yeah.
It's almost as if this story is almost entirely weird, evocative imagery. But it's long. So this is considered a novella by many people. And when you looked at it for the first time, you were like, "Oh, this is a long one."
Yep.
Especially considering it's a story that has all of two main characters and is set entirely on a rapidly shrinking tiny island in the middle of the Danube River. Are you familiar with the Danube River?
It's the second longest river in Europe.
Oh boy, it is. I didn't realize just how long the it goes through so many countries. And I looked up like Willows on the Danube, and like, yeah, this would be a freaky place to get stranded for any length of time if you're surrounded by nothing, and it's 1907.
They got a Canadian canoe.
Canadian. How did they get a Canadian all the way into the Danube? I kept forgetting it was the Danube as well.
I didn't. I kept being, because they say Danube about
every other
times.
How'd they get a Canadian canoe? Is it just a style?
I assume I assume like if it's not just a style, I assume they took it with them on the boat that they took to Europe.
Yeah.
I guess one of them's Swedish.
I'm looking at it right now. I guess a Canadian canoe is just what we consider a canoe. I think that's just when you think canoe, that's just what you're thinking.
Are there other types of canoes that we're unaware of?
I mean,
did canoes originate in Canada?
Canada? That's in British English, the term canoe can also refer to a kayak, while canoes are then called Canadian or open. So what we think of as a canoe, they call Canadian canoes, even though they call
just
canoes
like American football.
Even though apparently they call canoes kayaks, but they can also call, like, in order to distinguish it from what? They only call one thing canoes apparently, and they call it Canadian canoes.
No, I thought, okay, whatever.
Okay, in any case. No, I see. Canoes refer to kayaks, while canoes are then called Canadian canoes. Or just Canadians.
It doesn't sound like a word anymore. It sounds like you're saying kazoo.
Kazoos are called kazayaks.
Canadian kazoos.
Canadian canays.
Kazoo Canadia.
Kazoo Canadia. So in any case, this wacky story is set on the Danube. Two boys, our narrator who has no name, and
our other boy who also has no name.
Has no name, but he's called
the Swede.
The Swede, which in the audio version that I listened to, our narrator was like, I guess I'm doing a Swedish accent for this guy. So the Swede talks like this the whole time, and I was like, I don't think that's necessary. It doesn't mean that he's the Swedish chef.
There's some fun imagery in this story. There's a lot of imagery in this story. I was reading this story and I was like, wow, when are we getting to the story?
Yeah, because the first chunk of this is just, here's our trip down the Danube. Here's what it's like.
Yep.
And here's where the townspeople who we meet tell us not to go down the Danube.
I did mark down a Del Toroism.
Oh, yeah?
This one, though. Like
which one?
The descent into the underworld.
Into the other world, basically, because
yeah.
This story is unique in that it explains everything and explains nothing.
The first time I marked that down was during the very first paragraph.
Yeah.
When it says, on the big maps, this deserted area is painted in fluffy blue, growing fainter in color as it leaves the banks, and across it may be seen in large straggling letters the word, I can't pronounce that word, Soof.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it either. It's a word.
Meaning marshes, and I'm like, most stories would not have defined that word for us. They
or used that word.
Or used, like, it would have just said marshes or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, this story is very explainy and in ways that other stories aren't, but it leaves everything else unexplained.
Until the Swede sits down and explains everything in that way that like weird fiction does, where a character is like, well, here's what I think's going on. And then you as the reader are like, I guess this is what's going on because this guy's just sort of making stuff up. Even
though we have no reason to believe that. Especially, I think it's interesting because the Swede is the one who supposedly wasn't like in the know of all of this, like he didn't care. He
seems disconnected from the events until the narrator's like, oh, I think he's a little more into this than I gave him credit for. I think he has a better imagination, or he's more sensitive is how he puts it. I think he's more sensitive than I thought he was. But these boys are friends, they're pals, they're roomies, they're tent mates.
Cuddle together on the sand.
Lot of cuddles, lots of canoodling, lots of bros being bros. Sitting on the opposite side of the hot tub because we're not gay.
I was there's they're companions.
Algernon Blackwood was single his whole life. A lot of women found him very attractive, and he was not interested in women, leading a lot of people to speculate that he may probably have had relations with men. We don't know if he would have considered himself homosexual, but that's, the terms you use to identify yourself in the post-Victorian England are few and far between. But there's a lot of speculation as to his sexuality. But so that's it. Like, that's all we really can say about it.
Maybe he was ace. We don't know.
He could be. But there's some clues in this story that people have picked up on. So I read an essay that was written on Reddit, in the literature subreddit, and it's, unfortunately, I can't credit it because the person no longer exists. It's that thing where, like, their idea is gone. But it's a cool little breakdown, and they mentioned that this story uses colors a lot symbolically, but the one color it hardly uses at all is the color green, surprisingly. It mentions it, I think, twice, once to describe the color of the tops of the willow leaves, and the other to describe the color of the canvas of their tent. Our shared canvas, which, as the reader pointed out, is unusual for two things. One, canvas tents were white, typically. You didn't buy green canvas tents back in the day. Two, green, at this point in history in England, was the color that gay men used to identify themselves. You dressed in green. Oscar Wilde popularized that with green carnations. And our shared green canvas is seen by this reader and postulated as kind of a little tip of the hat to the relationship between these two men. There's more examples that this reader gives as the story goes on, that are like, oh, that is interesting. If you take a lot of the narrative at face value.
It's like lilacs, or what's the flower? It's just like, it's a symbol in literature that maybe like certain audiences outside of the circle wouldn't get, but those in it would be like, yeah, okay, I see you.
Yeah, it's
just like a little like flag.
And it's interesting because it's tempting to always, if there's a story about two men, to be like, are they gay? But this story is so much about anxiety and overwhelming forces and a world
being seen by outside forces on a journey where you don't expect to or want to be seen,
trying to avoid being seen by this larger presence, trying not to think about things in order to get through this. Like, there's a lot of that, and I think that, taken at face value, though, the story is still pretty terrifying, even if you don't do a read into it. So our boys are on the Danube. They're taking a boat ride. They're having a grand old time. I guess. Is it fun? I guess it's fun.
They seem to be having fun. Like, they're chilling.
This is the kind of thing people did for fun back then.
I mean, it was 1907. What were you gonna do? Stay inside?
I guess not.
You'd die of poison from the asbestos in your walls.
It's also, they keep describing it's hot and buggy, and I'm like, man, and you're just in this canoe all day. Like, it's hot. You can't do anything about the insects. I guess you just gotta enjoy yourself.
That's what the fire is for.
But not while you're canoeing.
Nah, you gotta have a canoe fire.
What isn't there? There's a story where someone sets a fire in the boat. Oh, it's The Adventures of Tintin, where Captain Haddock is drunk and he makes a fire because they're cold.
I kind of remember that like panel.
But they're in a raft, or they're in their like dinghy, and Tintin's like, "What are you doing?" And he puts the fire out.
It's pretty much on page 2 that they transfer from the real world into the new world, or the other world. They end up on they're traveling down this river, and every so often they stop at one of these like islands that forms from like debris and like discarded willow branches and stuff that kind of like form and coalesce into like a mound, basically.
Right, and they're in Bratislava.
Yeah.
In the Dunajski Louis protected landscape area of Austria-Hungary.
They traveled from the source in the Black Forest.
Yeah.
Is that a real place? I assume it's a real place.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's an awesome thing to be named. I wish I was a forest named the Black Forest.
So it's you mentioned that these are islands, but they're They come and go. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're temporary islands that form.
From like silt and other things. I mean, imagine, if you will, our giant floating patch of garbage, but made out of things that aren't garbage.
Right.
And they land at one to like rest for the evening, or for a couple of days, I guess, is their original plan.
Yeah.
And it's they're having a good old time for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So there's a lot of talk about the Danube. They're warned not to go ahead. They stop in a town and they're like, yeah, you shouldn't go ahead. Chances are the river's going to get kind of bad going forward. And I forget if the river's going to be too rough or if it's too low.
It's kind of both, I think. Like the journey there is going to be too rough, but by the time that they get out of the rough like area, there's not going to be any water for them to use, and they're going to be stuck because they can't go back the way they came.
Right.
And there's no water to go forward.
Okay. Yeah, it's tricky, and they ignored their warning in classic horror novel
as they
style.
Often do.
Yes.
Because that's the genre that we're in.
That's the genre we're in.
They're tourists in this area, and you can't listen to the locals if you're a tourist because you know better, because you're from a more sophisticated place, I guess. I don't know.
You're from England, and so you think you know.
You can't
more
listen
than
to other people
else.
if you're English.
Yeah, or with this, especially if you're English in the company of a Swede.
Yep.
So they decide to make camp for the night.
There's some more pontificating about the river.
And the only plants really are these willows, these willow trees or bushes. They're willow bushes, but they're huge.
I resent that statement.
They're willow bushes. They're huge and they're eerie because they seem to move of their own accord, kind of.
I love willow trees. They're spooky.
Oh, yeah.
They're spooky little creatures. They're not creatures. You know what I
well,
mean?
in this story, they may be. It's important to note that in this story, the willows aren't really the problem. It's what's in the willows, maybe, that are the problem.
The giant brass men.
The whatever is making the string. Well, okay, we'll get to it. But he wakes up in the night and he sees like a column of entities like shooting up into the sky from the willows. There's a lot of I guess just the term imagery is what I want to use. They spend a lot of time on this sequence.
There's they talk about undines, which are a being, like a mythological being, and relate. Then they start talking about Rome and yada yada yada. I was wondering how much our author knows about the origins of undines.
Considering that Algernon Blackwood legitimately believed in this kind of stuff, probably a whole lot. Remember, he was a member of like the Theosophical
I guess
Society.
my question was he using the more modern term in place of like nymph? Because undine didn't come around until the 1400s in alchemy stuff. So I was just wondering if he was like using the more modern term in place of the other term.
I don't know, but I can tell you right now that he definitely was being very deliberate about it.
Yeah. I love undines. I love that kind of stuff. It's so cool.
Because it's important to note that this is not something that Algernon Blackwood was just making up to spook people.
He's like the guy who wrote my vampire and werewolf book.
Yeah. Legitimately believed in this stuff. And
that's awesome. That's sick as heck.
Thought that we were just insignificant nothings compared to this overwhelming force. And anyway, we'll get to that because our narrator is having problems at night.
He doesn't care a fig for the river. That's my favorite line of this whole story.
They also see an otter at one point.
Oh yeah, that was something I marked as like foreshadowing ?
Foreshadowing, definitely.
Yeah, I was like, because the Swede first of all calls by Jove, which is awesome.
By Jove. Or should be? It should be a by a Jove.
That sounded more like you were trying to be Italian than Swedish.
I'm always trying to be Italian, baby.
And he's like, he cries out. He's like, by Jove, it's a man. It's a man's body. And our narrator shows up, and he's like, no, that's just an otter.
A river otter.
It was just doing its little splashy things. And they both were like, oh yeah, it's just an otter. And I'm like, bro.
I guess if sailors were constantly confusing manatees for mermaids, then I guess you could think that an otter was a dead body or vice versa.
I disagree. Have you ever seen an otter?
Have you ever seen a manatee? I would never look at a manatee and be like, beautiful, beautiful.
They have knees, though.
Sea lady. They have knees. You know what else has knees, though? Peppa Pig has knees. I'm not going to look at Peppa Pig and be like, say. I'm going to be like, I have knees. I saw myself sitting on a rock. I wouldn't be like,
you have to remember
sexy lady.
that these men on these boats were probably high off their butts.
That's true.
I have a feeling that the men in this story are also high off their butts, but I'll go off of my theory on that later.
I have a feeling that if you looked at if your average sailor's like list of like, here's my list of what I need in a woman, eventually they all get crossed off till you are just left with knees, question mark, at the end. You're like, fine, anything with knees, and then we'll just start from there.
Yep.
Peppa Pig agrees.
Yeah, they see an otter. It says, far below it came to the surface once again. We saw its black skin wet and shining in the sunlight. That's gotta be a gross, or I guess, I don't know, maybe it could be a corpse.
Oh, a bloated corpse. But at this point, it could be an otter.
Also, otters don't have skin, they have fur.
Are there otters in the Danube? I'm just looking that up.
Are there otters that only have skin?
The European otter, also known as the Eurasian otter, is a semi-aquatic mammal that lives in the Danube Delta and is well adjusted to aquatic life.
Do they look like corpses?
Looking at a Danube river otter, doesn't look so much like a corpse. Looks more like, an adorable river otter.
Exactly.
They are sleek, and when wet, they are very dark, but I guess
like if they just saw a black shape in the water, maybe.
Maybe. They have arms and legs, so maybe if they were like...
It was an otter, alive and out on the hunt, yet it looked exactly like the body of a drowned man turning helplessly in the current. What are you talking about?
Maybe they've never seen a drowned man.
Maybe they've never seen anything, because what does that even mean? Maybe
Regardless,
they're coping.
This will come back into play later on.
Yes, it will.
And as you said, there's a man who goes by on like a boat with like a pole. He goes poling by and he's like yelling at them, but they can't quite make out what he's saying, but he's crossing himself and it's like, hey, what's going on? Like telling him to get away or something. And then he just boats on by and they're like, well, that was weird.
I was so confused by the description of this man because where was it? This is going to happen again. It will happen again. For some reason, there it was. I found it difficult to focus my sight properly on the flying apparition. For some reason, I thought he was like in a flying boat.
I don't think so.
I was so confused.
I think he uses flying to mean like, whew, like it's going by pretty fast.
But when you say flying apparition in a story like this,
it's evocative.
My immediate thought was like he was in some sort of weird flying contraption.
He was not in a flying contraption. He was not a wizard in a flying boat.
That would be awesome, though.
Would change the course of the story. At night, they're hearing all kinds of stuff. They're hearing patters, like noises on the canvas of the tent.
No, they are not. Only he is.
Only he is admitting to having heard it.
He's not even admitting it to it.
Something is pressing down on the tent, like a large something or other. Mm-hmm. And in the morning, he thinks that the Willows have moved closer to their campsite, like their campground. Oh, and this is a tiny island.
It's like throughout the night he gets up a couple of times. The first time is when he sees the weird bronze men wiggling in the trees. Yeah. I say bronze men. They're more like bronze, like somethings. You know those like tube men that are outside of car?
I do. Like I know them very well. Yes, those guys are up in the tree doing their things,
disappearing into the sky,
shooting up into the sky like an Avengers-esque column of light.
My being high theory comes into play before this, though. I think I think one of the theories is that there was some sort of fungus or mold in the driftwood that they burned.
Fungus among us.
And they're just seeing stuff.
Is it ergot poisoning? Do they have ergot poisoning?
They are gonna start calling up them witch trials if we're not careful. This story is terrifying, by the way.
When in doubt, blame it on the ergot. Yes.
This story is horrifying, but at the end of the second chapter, he talks about how helpless he is and how much he can't think about it because there's nowhere for them to go and they're just stuck here. And I was like, dude, that's terrifying. Because in a lot of these stories, it's just people stuck in quotation marks in a house that they could easily leave. In this, they are stuck on a rapidly sinking island in the middle of a violent river.
Yep, because the river is tearing away the edges of the island. And also, they wake up in the morning, one of their oars is gone, and the other one has been sanded down to a razor-sharp wit. And if they try to use it, it'll snap in half.
Also, their boat has had a hole poked in it.
Yep.
It's not even trying to pretend to be something natural either. It's just like, nope, here's this sharply cut little sliver of wood. Have fun.
But it's cut in such a way that if they may not have noticed it, they could have gotten out onto the water with it. It would have held for a minute or two until they were far enough out, and then it would have started leaking, and they would have just sunk. They would have been sunk. So yeah, they are literally stranded on this island.
With
Spoilers.
Something
Even
that
at
calls for them to worship it. There's a segment in this where he's like, I wanted to worship whatever this was.
Yeah, they start feeling compelled to acknowledge some kind of presence. Spoilers for the end of the story. Even though you said up top they both survive, there's no indication of how they get out of this. There's no, I mean, clearly they do because he's telling it in the past tense. I guess maybe one of them rides the other one, like in the SpongeBob movie. I don't know, but yeah. And also some of their food disappears.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, that's just the otters, obviously. That's just the corpse otters, you know. It's been really windy the whole time in the story, and eventually the wind goes away, and that's worse.
Yes, yeah, the wind goes away, and they suddenly realize that there's this ominous noise that they haven't been able to hear the whole time.
It's a gong. It sounds like a gong, and
that's
it comes
the best
from everywhere.
That's the best he can describe it. It's sort of this like sound of something that changes position relative to where you are. Sometimes it's over you, sometimes it's all around you. It's just this sound of something that's moving around. This is also the point where I was like, oh, this is very much like the Blair Witch Project. Mm-hmm. It's very Blair Witch. They're stranded in a natural place where they are beset by supernatural forces that are unexplainable. They're just, something is screwing with the environment. Also, it is that weird thing where up to a point in this story, this could all be in our narrator's head.
Yep.
Up to a point, this could be two guys going nuts because of essentially not cabin fever, but kind of the same thing, like
the opposite of cabin fever, outdoor fever.
They've been in each other's company for way too long, mm-hmm. and they're getting on each other's nerves, and one of them is sabotaging the trip. Like, that could be the explanation for this up to a point.
We gotta take a pause, though.
Okay.
Because before everything goes haywire, well, after everything goes haywire, but before they realize everything's actually going haywire, there's a pause in the narrative where our author describes the most decadent stew of all time.
Talk about this stew.
Our narrator is like, I was cooking tonight, and I was making some fire stew, and I wanted my companion to come over and help me break some bread into it, but he had this weird thing with the gong. But this stew, though, has mm-hmm. onions, has potatoes, has bits of bacon fat, flavors from all the other stews. And you know what we had after it? Another stew of plums. And sugar, and a brew of strong tea with dried milk. Like, I love when stories do this, when there's, like, some real drama happening, and then the author is like, but you know what's great? Food. Some
Studio Ghibli stew and some Studio Ghibli plums. And I do love the fact that it does serve to remind us that they were ready to camp. Yeah. They're not starving. They mm-hmm. have their food with them. Like,
and this man's smoking a pipe.
Smoking a pipe. They could be having a good time, except for the fact that they are in hell. They yep. are on a haunted island in the middle of somewhere, and there's a gong noise. Something is destroying their camping supplies, and then some weird divots appear in the sand. And
that's fine. We should also mention they pitch camp in the center of the like island in a divot in like yes. a hole in the ground.
That's true. But these weird cone shapes appear in the sand. Mm-hmm. These perfectly shaped cones. And at one point he's like, they could have been caused by tiny little tornadoes. Maybe.
Also, I like the dynamic between these two because the Swede is like, dude, I know you're trying to explain this away, but we both know you're trying to explain this away, and you gotta not do that.
Once he says, so yeah, the Swede is like, well, how about this? I bet you're gonna have an answer for this. And after he says that, I noticed that our narrator, everything the Swede says, he's like, well, it's probably just this.
Yeah.
And it is a perfect dynamic. And that was the point where I was like, are they just getting on each other's nerves? Is that what this whole thing is? Like two guys who are just sick of each other at this point, and they're creating all this in their minds? Turns out no. But
it turns out there's an evil, not even evil. There is a creature.
Not even evil. This is terrifying because this is beyond the concept of good and evil. You might say it's beyond good and evil, but it is cosmic horror is what this is.
It is unknown.
Yes, because things go from bad to worse. They're stranded on this island.
The Swede keeps saying it needs to provide a victim. It needs a victim, and our narrator's like, "Can you not say that? Maybe like, is that something that's necessary?"
The Swede seems to have an understanding of what's going on beyond what the narrator is aware of. But you're like, "Are you just making this up? Where are you getting all this information from?"
The Swede even says, "But you are right about the fact that we shouldn't like think about it or talk about it, because if we think about it or talk about it, we're just going to make it come true."
So,
and I'm like, then why do you keep saying there needs to be a victim?
There is something, not just on this island, but around them, like on the banks of the river as well. Like something is moving among the willows they can't see, but they can sense, they get a sense of it. It's around them. It's what's making the gong sound. It's present, but it's not there. The long and short of it is they are in a part of the world where the walls between realities are very thin, and we can perceive things on the other side of reality, and those things can push their way into our world. The problem is they're not aware of us, but if they become aware of us, they will treat us as if we were like just bugs they found in their bed. Like they're not angry at us, they don't care about us,
but they don't want us around.
They want us there. Like, ugh.
That's gross. Ew.
And as you said, what is one way they can become aware of us?
Did I say something?
We think about them.
Oh, we think about them. We become aware of them, and we stare into the void, and the void stares back, and it's just a mess for everybody.
And so it's this thing of like, okay,
it's the bye-bye man all over again.
There's giant invisible monsters all around. Don't worry. The only thing you have to do is not think about giant invisible monsters. Go. And there is a cool part of this where a couple of times something distracts our characters and it saves their lives.
Yeah.
Because they momentarily stop thinking about the giant otherworldly beings, and the otherworldly beings can't find them, which is horrifying. By the way, the divots in the sand are them poking around trying to figure things out.
They're little guys. That's what I called them. Like when anytime the word patter or anything like that is used, I'm like, it's just a little guys. They're just little guys just wandering around.
See, I saw it as something enormous.
Oh no,
with like all these tentacle things feeling around down, but like tapping on your tent, like. But it's like
that's probably totally what it is. But I just couldn't stop picturing just little like creatures.
But also, it could just be that it's nothing that we could visualize is also the other thing. It's that fourth dimension thing where if an animal, a creature that's fourth dimensional appears in our world, we're only going to be able to see 3 dimensions of it. The rest will be incomprehensible. We won't be able to understand it. And that's kind of what's going on here. We have something that lives beyond our perception that is surrounding this area, and they're in a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah. And you know what? I love our narrator. I hold him dear to my heart because he saves his friend's life.
What does he do? What does the Swede do?
The Swede nearly throws himself into the river.
Yes.
And our narrator is like, my friend was in danger and I could not hesitate. And I was like, my heart.
Yeah.
Like there's so, like, we've read so many of these stories where like the person gets taken away because the other person is too scared or hesitates. And in this one, you know what? He said, I could not hesitate because that was my boy.
Bros being bros.
And he saves him. I mean, somebody else dies, but he saves him.
He does.
Somebody else we have no connection to dies.
He pulls him away, and the Swede is trying to drown himself. And
you know what? That could also be seen as an act of desperation to save his friend. So his friend
right,
didn't get taken.
Because the Swede has kept talking about someone needs to be sacrificed. He ends up falling on top of him, and that's what distracts them. The Swede falls on top of him, or like pins his arm or something and hurts him really bad. And our narrator is like, "Ow, my arm!" And he stops thinking about the danger they're in. And then the Swede gets distracted by something else, or gets knocked out or something, and that saves him. He passes out, which is very Langoliers. In Stephen King's The Langoliers, the only way you can survive the time travel is to be unconscious. So you have to somehow knock yourself out in order to survive. Other things this story reminded me of, besides Blair Witch, are it has shades of Stephen King's It in it, in just the sense that like there's this cosmic entity, and I don't know why, it just reminds me of it. Like, not so much the plot as the feeling when Stephen King's firing on all cylinders in It, like just that sense that like there is something going on. I want a version of the Willows told from the Swede's perspective, because I want to know what was going through his head the entire time.
It's just a nonstop screaming.
Because it's the Swede who's the one who narrates and tells our narrator what his theory on these entities is, and so that we sort of have to accept that's the Swede. That might be the truth, I guess.
Yeah. They see the corpse of a guy. The corpse of a peasant. That was a really weird. I don't know. That took me out of it for a second. I just wasn't expecting the word peasant to be dropped in there.
Yeah. Well, because they're in like a kind of a wildernessy area, so they're surrounded by villages and stuff. It's the early 20th century.
And they're planning on giving the man a burial, but then the creatures are like, no, that's ours. Yoink.
So they find this body and they turn it over, and the face is covered in the same divots that they found on the ground. They go to grab it, and suddenly they feel something like swoop up and move the body down the river, because they thought they were alone, but the creatures were still there. These entities were still there, and they wanted this body, and that's the sacrifice. Now, well, what does it say about the body as it goes away? Ooh, it's the very end of the story.
Turning over and over on the waves like an otter.
Just like an otter does. Rolls around like a corpse.
My favorite otter behavior, corpsing.
Corpsing. The otter corpses. Forgets or starts cracking up because another person did something funny on stage. Corpsing otter. So yeah, that's how the plot ends. I did want to read to you a couple of passages from this essay about the person who's writing it, doing a gay read on it.
Yeah.
He talks about a little bit of green canvas, but he says like he pulls a few quotes. Like it says at one point, the Swede says, "There are things about us, I'm sure, that make for disorder, disintegration, destruction, our destruction. While the fire blazed between us, we've strayed out of a safe line somewhere. We had strayed, as the Swede put it, into some region or some set of conditions where the risks were great, yet unintelligible to us, where the frontiers of some unknown world lay close about us." He says, as a final result of too long a sojourn here, we should be carried over the border and deprived of what we call our lives, yet by mental, not physical processes. There's a lot of talks about dying in society, like the societal death. Now listen, he said, the only thing for us to do is to go on as though nothing had happened, follow our usual habits, go to bed and so forth, pretend we feel nothing and notice nothing. It is a question wholly of the mind, and the less we think about them, the better our chance of escape. Above all, don't think, for what you think happens. And so pulling these quotes out of context and of the plot and looking at them as a man talking about his relationship with another man, there is that read on it that's kind of interesting and fascinating without taking too big of a leap, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we've made a lot of, like, jokes about, like, potential gay, like, subplots and, like, stories and stuff, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that looking at these stories in context of the times and in context of the authors, the world was a lot gayer than people like to imagine it was.
Yes, particularly the literary world.
It is, I think, irresponsible to take away the context of our authors and of our history and like stuff like that from stories like this, because I think that part of the horror in tales like this is the unspoken stuff or the stuff that's spoken as other things. Yeah.
And this read on it is interesting because the horror is society. It's not the horror is my feelings. The horror is my gayness. The horror is what we are facing out here that's bigger than us.
And I think this is where Blackwood goes beyond what H.P. Lovecraft does.
Yeah.
Because it's not an incomprehensible creature from another dimension in the same way. It's like that's there, but it's also the invisible eyes that watch your every move and that you feel watches your every move and you don't know what to do about them.
Well, because Lovecraft, I mean, this is, of course, we're making a lot of assumptions about Blackwood here, but they are, I believe, there's evidential support to do a read like this. But then so if Blackwood was operating on that level, like cosmic horror is a reflection of this giant world that wishes harm on me or my friends, people I know, people in general. Even if it's not a gay read, it's like any kind of oppressed class of people, but doing a gay read is fine. Whereas Lovecraft was operating from cosmic horror, being a fear of the outsider itself, being a fear of the different, being a fear of carrying that fear. Like if you look at like The Shadow over Innsmouth, being afraid that you might be one of those people, or like the horror at Red Hook, like just being terrified of black people or immigrants or societies made up of people who aren't like you. And whereas Lovecraft was a straight white man coming from a world of privilege and plenty. I mean, Blackwood too was a white man coming from a world of privilege and plenty. But if he had if there was something going on with him where he felt like, he was definitely seeing the horror as coming from up here, as opposed to Lovecraft, who was seeing the horror as coming from down here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
I love it. I
want to read more of his stuff.
Definitely look into The Wendigo, which is kind of the companion piece to this, because it's another camping story. It's set in Canada, and it's more. It's a little more comprehensible because there's a thing called the Wendigo in it. But it does have some of the most haunting imagery I've ever read in a short story. I love the Wendigo, and it's a much more educated and sort of like grounded take on the actual, at the time, Wendigo legends that he would have been familiar with from living in the wilderness of Canada, as opposed to the horned monster that kills people that you see in like modern horror fiction. This is more just like,
he does talk a bit about Native Americans in this story. He compares the Swede to them a lot, which it's not like the most politically like correct way to refer to people anymore, but it was 1907.
Yes. He obviously had a lot of white man's respect for Native American indigenous trackers, and because I mean he worked with indigenous people in Canada. I don't think that he was also a British guy from the 19th century. He had his prejudices.
Was it the 20th century? I guess 19th and 20th century.
Well, I mean, he was born and lived in the 19th century. He wrote his autobiography about when he was young, and he wrote it. It's called I think The First 30 Years. He was like, I made a huge change in my life when I hit 30, and here's an autobiography about that, like about being like my life up till I was 30, and then I was like, nah, I'm gonna be a writer, and like that kind of like kicked off. I just love that he's like, it's kind of like when I think Kenneth Branagh did the same thing. He wrote his autobiography when he was like 30 some years old. He's like, no, I've had a pretty interesting life so far. Here you go.
I mean, hey, why let all of those memories fade to nothing and write it when you're older?
True. So there's never been a real like multimedia adaptation of The Willows, and I can see why.
This is a very literary story.
It's a very literary story. It's very much about what you don't see, and like what you think might be happening. However, elements of it are included in certain things. It definitely influenced a lot of books and like just the style of weird fiction.
This has its willow tendrils in everything. Not in everything, but I definitely sense its influence in other things. And
then in 2020, T. Kingfisher, the author Ursula Vernon, writing under she writes under the name T. Kingfisher. At times. In 2020, she published the novel The Hollow Places, which is I wouldn't even say a reinterpretation. It's literally a sequel to The Willows, set in modern times about a woman who inadvertently stumbles into this land.
Location,
It follows all the rules of Algernon Blackwood's setup. It expands the geography. It doesn't over-explain things. It is a horrifying novel. It's also T. Kingfisher, so it's incredibly charming. I mean, a lot of people don't like Ursula Vernon's work because her narrators are a little goofy and funny, and she has a very biting sense of humor. I think her narrators are lovable goofs, and they tend to like ease you into the stories well. If you like the Willows, I highly recommend reading The Hollow Places, because it's a great follow-up. You get more of this like setting in this world, a lot more horror, and these just more exploration of these entities without, again, over explaining anything. It's still very mysterious and weird, but also very funny, and we get to learn a little bit more about the otter. So
nice.
Do you think Algernon Blackwood has ever seen an otter?
Yes, I think he's seen an otter. He lived in Canada. I am sure he's seen otters.
I just don't understand. I don't understand what he sees when he sees an otter.
What I'm saying is the guy lived outdoors long enough. He did enough outdoorsy stuff. Maybe stuff looks weird after a while. Like maybe it's that thing where you're just like, I thought I just saw a dead guy. Turns out it was an otter.
You know what? That's fair. Because when I was a kid, you know what? They thought a log was the Loch Ness Monster.
Loch Ness Monster.
You know what? You can see, people like to see things where they're seeing things. If you're freaked out, you like to see spooky things. Human brains fill in gaps where gaps don't need to be filled in. That's why Bloody Mary works.
There you go. I don't know if Guillermo del Toro would have likes this story or not. No idea. But it seems like it's up his alley.
I mean, maybe a bit. You know, he likes H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
He has to give this story at least a chance.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would want him to adapt it, but
no, I don't think this is a story that needs adaptation.
Yeah.
I think that this is a story that is solid where it is. I think any attempts to visualize most of it would just make it kind of goofy and maybe not work very well.
Yeah.
This story, I think the only way this story could be adapted is if you did an audio narration of the story and you put together a little like film in front of the story that had like really that had video, like short clips of like Willows and like some funky editing. Like I think this would be a very cool like visual novel.
Yeah. It would. It would have to be visually poetic.
Yeah, like I don't think this could be straight adapted to screen, but I think if somebody with like enough skill in video editing put this like something together on YouTube, like a silent short film with this story narrated behind it, that would be awesome. So,
in answer to our question, whether or not Guillermo del Toro likes Algernon Blackwood, I completely forgot. Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan, Chogan to his friends, co-wrote a novel after The Strain was done called The Hollow Ones, which is their take on Algernon Blackwood's John Silence series.
All right.
So yes, they are. He's fan of Algernon Blackwood. It's a tribute to occult detective stories. We haven't covered it because we kind of gave up on Guillermo del Toro's fiction writing after a while. But I don't know. Maybe one day. Hey, if you like our show,
the Blackwood Tapes book series. It's a book series.
Is it? Like, yep. I just stopped following. This tells us how far we've strayed from the light. We kind of gave up on Guillermo del Toro. Listeners, should we cover Guillermo del Toro's Blackwood Tape series?
Hey, I'd be down. We have to finish our movies first, though.
We have to finish the movies first. Should we cover the Blackwood Tapes once we finish?
We're a Guillermo del Toro podcast. We have to cover all of his stuff.
Great. As soon as we are done covering all the movies in his series called whatever it's called,
The Ecstasy of Influence.
Ecstasy of Influence. We will cover The Hollow Ones by Guillermo del Toro and Chogan. We will cover whatever the next book is. Whatever the next book is. I don't know. Is there another book in the series? I have no idea.
I don't know. It just the Blackwood Tapes.
It does say the Blackwood Tapes, but I don't see any other stories listed in the series. So
the Blackwood Tapes.
There's only one novel in the series, so it's called Blackwood. In any case, we'll cover that one. You can read it for free if you have Kindle Unlimited.
I don't. Also, I don't like reading digital books, as you know.
I love them. But Willow, what is the next story in?
The next story.
The Fabulous Formless Darkness.
I didn't mark the page, but I opened to it anyways. The Asian Shore by Thomas M.
Dish.
Dish.
Thomas M. Dish. I don't know anything about this story. I've never read this story. I don't know if I've even read any Thomas. I'm sure I've read Thomas Dish, but I don't.
It goes one step beyond Henry James's The Jolly Corner.
Oh, good.
Portraying a unique doppelganger situation. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Doppelgangers.
It is not a category story, neither supernatural nor science fiction.
Uh-oh. Is it interesting? Is it good? Just tell us if it's good, David G. Hartwell.
He has a significant body of fiction in such collections as Fun with Your Head, Getting into Death, 120 H-Bombs, and the novel The Businessman.
The Businessman.
A body of work that seems of growing importance to the contemporary horror field.
Thomas M. Dish. Well, I guess we're going to be dishing it out next time. So join us then when we cover The Asian Shore by Thomas Dish. Otherwise... Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, this was a fun episode. This is a fun story. Episode. I like this story a lot. Highly recommend reading it.
Mm-hmm.
One of these days, I'm going to make us read one of my collections of queer horror.
One of these days we'll get to it. We're never stopping.
We're never stopping.
Oh, I know why I know Thomas Dish. He wrote The Brave Little Toaster.
Oh. That is a horror story.
He wrote the novel The Brave Little Toaster. So
one of the most horrifying movies I've ever seen.
Ever made. He also wrote The Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars and the third Brave Little Toaster story. I can't remember what it's called. Or maybe there's only two. I don't know. In any case, we gotta go. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. I am Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when it's Del Toro time.